Her husband had an affair with his 23-year-old secretary. "I'm having your husband's child," she said on a brisk fall morning in Boston. Rebecca Walker stood at the marble counter of her elegant kitchen, fully unaware that her life was about to change forever. She was an early riser, a habit formed from her years in corporate law. As she sipped her first cup of coffee, she heard a light click of heels on the hardwood floor. Turning around, she saw Amanda Wilson, her husband Michael's young secretary, seated at the kitchen island as though it were her own home. Rebecca froze, startled not just by the unexpected guest, but by the purposeful way Amanda sat there, dressed in a sleek black dress that seemed far too expensive for someone in her position. Rebecca placed her cup on the countertop, schooling her face into a mask of polite indifference. Over the years, she had learned that in crisis moments, composure was her strongest shield. Amanda met her gaze with wide, icy blue eyes. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence crackled with invisible tension. Finally, Amanda said in a trembling yet oddly resolute voice that she was pregnant, and the baby belonged to Michael Harrison, Rebecca's husband of 12 years. In that instant, the warmth drained from the morning, and Rebecca felt the first tremors of an earthquake that would soon upend her entire world. Rebecca's mind raced. She had built a reputation in corporate law for staying calm under pressure, but never had she anticipated this type of betrayal in her own kitchen. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening, yet her voice remained steady as she asked Amanda how far along she was. 8 weeks, the young woman replied, producing a grainy ultrasound picture from her designer purse. Rebecca's gaze flickered over the image, and a raw, cold anger stirred deep within her. She did not shout or cry. Instead, she asked whether Michael knew Amanda was here. "He did not," Amanda answered, explaining that she wanted Rebecca to hear it from her first. There was a triumphant gleam in Amanda's eye, one that suggested she thought she'd seized the upper hand. Still, Rebecca withheld any outburst. She moved quietly to the coffee maker, offering her husband's mistress a cup, though remarking it might not be wise in her condition. Amanda declined, growing visibly uneasy at Rebecca's controlled demeanor. After a moment of charged silence, Rebecca casually mentioned an infidelity clause in the Harrison family trust, a little-known provision that could change everything. Amanda's fleeting confidence flickered, and just as swiftly she left. Alone in the kitchen, Rebecca stood for several minutes, the enormity of Amanda's words pressing down on her. Despite her personal shock, her training as a lawyer guided her next steps. She reached for her phone and called her longtime legal assistant, Sarah. In a measured tone, Rebecca asked her to gather every file related to the Harrison family trust, particularly anything regarding the grandmother's infidelity clause. Sarah didn't hesitate or question the reason. She simply promised to have the documents ready within the hour. Rebecca then placed the phone down, feeling the weight of 12 years of marriage bear down on her shoulders. She thought back to when she first met Michael Harrison, a rising star in the Boston legal world who had swept her off her feet with charm and ambition. Together, they had built their careers and purchased this luxurious home in Beacon Hill. Only now did she see how that charm and ambition could rot into something self-serving and callous. As she stared at the empty seat Amanda had occupied moments ago, Rebecca made a silent promise. If Michael had gambled their marriage away on a reckless affair, she would ensure he paid the highest possible price. That afternoon, Michael came home early, confirming Rebecca's suspicions that Amanda had already informed him of her visit. He stood in the kitchen, still wearing his tailored suit, but his expression was anything but composed. In the past, Michael was always the model of self-assurance. Now his eyes darted nervously, betraying the panic he felt. Rebecca studied him coolly. She had already delved into the Harrison family trust documents, refreshing her memory on the ironclad clause left behind by Eleanor Harrison, Michael's formidable grandmother. Should any named beneficiary commit infidelity, they forfeited their entire share of the $50 million trust. It was a clause that many considered archaic until today. "Why did Amanda come here?" Michael asked quietly, trying to control the tremor in his voice. Rebecca set aside the printouts she'd been reviewing. "She wanted me to know she's pregnant," she replied, each word carefully measured. and she wanted to stake her claim on the Harrison fortune before everyone else found out. Michael's face blanched, and in that moment, he realized that his carefully managed life was about to unravel. Rebecca saw the truth reflected in his eyes. He knew there was no hiding this. She calmly sipped her coffee and waited for him to break. Michael attempted an explanation, weaving a story about a lapse in judgment during a high-pressure business trip. He insisted it was an isolated mistake, that he never intended to hurt Rebecca, and that they could still salvage their marriage. Her silence unnerved him. She recalled the countless times he'd told her that they were partners in every sense. Apparently, those promises meant very little when put to the test. As he spoke, Rebecca's legal mind dissected his words. His excuses sounded flimsy, his regret performative. She noticed every micro-expression and half-truth, collecting them like evidence in a courtroom. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Were you ever going to tell me?" For a moment, his carefully sculpted composure fractured. He hesitated, suggesting he might have confessed eventually, though Rebecca sensed he was only saying what he thought she wanted to hear. Deciding she had heard enough, she reached for the folder, labeled with the Harrison Family Trust. Opening it, she laid out the exact wording of the infidelity clause for Michael to read. As he skimmed the text, his face darkened. He looked at Rebecca with shock and desperation, suddenly grasping the magnitude of what he stood to lose. Rebecca gave him no time to plead. She had a meeting booked with Judge Matthews the next morning, the same judge who oversaw the administration of the Harrison Family Trust. In her eyes, there was no question about enforcing the clause. Michael had made his choice. Now he would face the consequences. She told him to expect official papers soon, and calmly stepped out of their own kitchen, leaving him to absorb the blow. That evening, Rebecca retreated to the study, an ornate room filled with leather-bound volumes of law and family histories. She couldn't help thinking of Eleanor Harrison, a woman she once admired for her keen legal mind. Eleanor had always treated Rebecca more like a granddaughter than an outsider. Perhaps Eleanor had suspected her grandson's weaknesses and had placed this clause as a final test of character. Rebecca reviewed emails, phone records, and any additional breadcrumbs left by Michael's carelessness. Though heartbreak churned in her stomach, a resolute calm settled over her. If Michael thought this would end with a quiet settlement or an effortless apology, he was mistaken. Legal war was the domain Rebecca knew best, and she intended to fight with every resource at her disposal. By sunrise, Rebecca was already on her way to the courthouse. She moved through the marble corridors with the polished grace of someone who had spent many years navigating the legal system. Sarah trailed at her side, a folder of meticulously gathered evidence in hand. Together, they stepped into Judge Matthews's chambers, a place that often decided fates behind closed doors. The judge, a stern yet fair woman, had a personal connection to the Harrison family. She was well aware of the trust's clause, but she hadn't anticipated it would ever be used against Michael himself. As Rebecca presented her case, she provided documented proof of Michael's affair. Receipts for out-of-town hotels where Amanda accompanied him, and text messages that went beyond professional boundaries. Judge Matthews listened in thoughtful silence, occasionally pressing her lips together at each new revelation. Rebecca finished by underlining the trust's exact provisions. Michael's grandmother had made infidelity a deal-breaker for any family member receiving a share. Now that he had violated that stipulation, the entire inheritance, $50 million, would default to the secondary beneficiary or be withheld altogether, depending on the trust's specific wording. Judge Matthews nodded gravely, promising a swift review before making her decision. The moment Rebecca left the judge's chambers, she felt her phone buzz. It was Amanda. Though every fiber of Rebecca's being bristled at hearing from her again, she answered. Amanda's voice trembled, but the bravado she once displayed had vanished. She worried that Michael was distancing himself now that the scandal was at risk of going public. Rebecca kept her response brief. She informed Amanda that if she wanted any form of support or arrangement, she should speak directly with Michael's legal counsel. By late afternoon, the rumor mill at Harrison and Brooks, the prestigious law firm where both Rebecca and Michael worked, was in full swing. Although Michael was a managing partner, he had called out sick, leaving the rest of the partners to wonder about the abrupt cancellation of his meetings. Meanwhile, Rebecca moved with quiet efficiency, scheduling an emergency board meeting to address the conflict of interest posed by Michael's affair with an employee. That evening, as she stepped into the Beacon Hill townhouse, the place felt emptier. Michael was nowhere to be seen, and an unsettling calm hung in the air. She recalled the judge's expression, sympathetic but firm. Tomorrow, the official order would likely be signed, and Michael's downfall would be sealed. Early the next morning, Rebecca stood before the mirror, fastening a pair of diamond earrings Michael had once given her as an anniversary gift. She no longer saw them as tokens of love, but as symbols of the life she would soon reclaim on her own terms. Downstairs, her phone rang. It was Sarah confirming that Judge Matthews had signed the order. Michael Harrison's interest in the trust was frozen, pending final forfeiture upon confirmation of the infidelity. At Harrison and Brooks, a hush fell over the corridors when Rebecca arrived. Many associates averted their eyes, uncertain how to greet her, now that rumors were turning into confirmed facts. She made her way to the boardroom, carrying a neat binder. Seated at the table were the firm's senior partners, including the respected co-founder, Richard Brooks, who eyed Rebecca with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Without preamble, she laid out the evidence of Michael's unethical conduct, emphasizing not just the personal betrayal, but the liability it posed to the firm. Pictures of Michael and Amanda at private dinners, mixed with potential breaches of confidentiality that Amanda might have accessed. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some had admired Michael's ambition. Now they recognized it had led him down a perilous path. In the middle of Rebecca's presentation, Michael burst into the boardroom, looking disheveled and uncharacteristically panicked. Security guards, alerted by Sarah, hovered near the door to maintain order. Michael attempted to retake control, insisting that personal matters should remain private. But Rebecca's calm, methodical revelations made it impossible to separate his affair from the firm's interests. She demonstrated that Amanda could have accessed sensitive information, potentially jeopardizing major cases. Richard Brooks, a measured voice of reason, asked Michael directly if there was any truth to the documents presented. Pressed under the collective gaze of the board, Michael attempted to downplay the affair, calling it a brief mistake. Yet, his denial did nothing to stem the tide of evidence. The partners had already seen enough to realize that, at best, Michael had exercised catastrophically poor judgment. At worst, he had endangered their professional reputation. In a somber voice, Brooks declared that the firm would vote on suspending Michael, effective immediately, pending a formal investigation. For a man accustomed to shaping every outcome, the loss of control appeared to devastate him. He glared at Rebecca, a flicker of raw hatred in his eyes, before storming out of the boardroom into an uncertain future. Rebecca remained seated as the board members quietly gathered their papers. She knew what came next: phone calls to clients, damage control, and internal investigations. The betrayal was now fully in the open. Standing, she offered a polite nod to Richard Brooks, who returned the gesture, understanding that the firm needed decisive action to preserve its credibility. Once the room cleared, she allowed herself a single moment to exhale. The events of the past days felt surreal, like living out a script she would have filed under worst-case scenario. Through the boardroom's glass walls, she could see associates whispering in clusters, shooting furtive glances in her direction. She refused to let it rattle her. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Patricia Harrison, Michael's mother. Patricia had always held a complicated relationship with her son, but she deeply respected Rebecca's professionalism. With a subdued tone, she asked to meet, mentioning that there might be additional assets or files Rebecca should be aware of. Rebecca agreed to visit Patricia's estate the following day. Walking out, Rebecca held her head high, well aware that in the court of public opinion, especially within elite legal circles, perceptions would shift rapidly. She intended to control that narrative. Later that night, Rebecca drove to Boston General Hospital, having received a call that Amanda was there with complications related to her pregnancy. Despite her anger, she felt a moral responsibility to ensure there was no immediate danger to the unborn child. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and offered a cold, impersonal atmosphere that mirrored the distance between them. Amanda lay in a small room, looking pale and frightened, a far cry from the confident woman who had once occupied Rebecca's kitchen stool. When Rebecca entered, Amanda's eyes filled with tears. She revealed that she might lose the baby and pleaded for Michael's presence. But Michael was nowhere to be found, presumably too wrapped up in his own crisis. Rebecca stood by the bed, a tumult of emotions swirling within her. Although she would never condone what Amanda had done, she recognized that a life, possibly innocent, was at stake. Amanda then blurted out a half-coherent confession about how her father pressured her for inside information on the firm's clients and how Michael had been more deeply involved than Rebecca imagined. Their affair had not been merely a reckless act of passion. It was entangled with high-stakes business manipulations. Rebecca left without promising anything. The next day, Rebecca arrived at Patricia Harrison's Beacon Hill residence, an imposing structure of classic brick and ornate windows. Patricia welcomed her with subdued warmth, leading her into a study filled with black and white photos of the Harrison lineage. Rebecca noticed a regal portrait of Eleanor Harrison, the matriarch whose legal brilliance and fierce independence had established the family's fortune. Patricia handed Rebecca a sealed envelope, explaining that it contained documents Eleanor had compiled in her final years. According to Patricia, Eleanor suspected Michael's ethical boundaries were slipping. She had quietly hired private investigators and compiled extensive evidence of questionable financial dealings. Patricia admitted she had turned a blind eye, hoping Michael would correct his course, but now she felt compelled to hand everything over. Rebecca opened the envelope and skimmed the first few pages: suspicious wire transfers, hidden offshore accounts, and altered settlement figures. The scale of deceit was staggering. If these documents reached the authorities, it would go far beyond an affair. Michael could face criminal charges. Patricia's voice trembled as she expressed her regrets. She had lost confidence that her son's moral compass could be salvaged. Rebecca promised to use the information wisely, though her resolve hardened. Michael's betrayal ran even deeper than she'd imagined. Bolstered by these revelations, Rebecca secured an appointment with the district attorney's office. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to avenge her personal heartbreak, but to uphold the legal ethics that anchored her career. By presenting the financial irregularities, she was exposing a potential scandal that could rock Boston's legal community. Michael's name was on the law firm door, and if these allegations proved true, it would spark inquiries into every case he had touched. Sarah worked alongside Rebecca, organizing files and cross-checking data. The complexity of Michael's schemes was astounding. He had diverted settlement funds, negotiated underhanded deals, and even collaborated with outside competitors to inflate his personal profits. Rebecca recognized the irony. Michael had once taught her how to operate shrewdly within the gray areas of corporate law. Now, she was using those lessons to dismantle his empire. By evening, Rebecca's office was strewn with boxes of evidence. The process was painful, akin to dissecting every aspect of her marriage in a forensic manner. But with each discovered lie, her resolve only solidified. She understood that the man she had loved was not merely flawed, he was dangerously corrupt. And the law, which they both claimed to uphold, would be his undoing. Word spread quickly that the district attorney's office had opened an investigation into Michael Harrison. At Harrison and Brooks, tensions soared. The board called an immediate meeting to discuss the potential ramifications, worried about lost clients and tarnished reputations. Some partners initially wanted to shield the firm from scandal, but Rebecca's thorough documentation left no room for doubt. This was more than just a marital dispute. It was a serious legal crisis. Meanwhile, Michael had gone into hiding, making few public appearances and evading calls. Rumor suggested he was desperately meeting with various attorneys, seeking an exit strategy. Amanda's condition remained delicate, and while she was out of the hospital, no one was certain if the pregnancy would endure. She had started cooperating with the authorities, fueled by fear and a lingering hope that she might salvage her future. Rebecca, for her part, balanced her role as a partner at the firm and a key figure in the criminal investigation. Each step she took was deliberate. She knew Michael was capable of intimidation or legal counterattacks, but she trusted the bedrock of evidence. For once, it felt like the system, one she had devoted her life to, was on her side. Not long after, Rebecca was informed that a grand jury had indicted Michael on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The official documents detailed how he had manipulated client accounts, siphoned money into hidden funds, and compromised his fiduciary duty. For a figure once lauded as one of Boston's legal elites, it was a dramatic collapse. Walking into the courthouse for the arraignment hearing felt surreal. Media crews crowded the steps, shouting questions about the scandal that had captured the city's fascination. Flashbulbs illuminated Rebecca's face. But she maintained her composure, recalling the countless times she and Michael had walked those very steps together, confident in their shared success. Now their paths diverged under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Inside, Michael stood before the judge, disheveled and stripped of his former arrogance. His defense attorney entered a plea of not guilty, setting the stage for a potentially lengthy trial. Rebecca watched from a distance, feeling a blend of sadness and resolve. She once believed she would grow old with this man, but that future was lost. The law would be their final battlefield, deciding how much Michael would lose, and how fully Rebecca would be vindicated. Back at Harrison and Brooks, the board made a unanimous decision to remove Michael's name from the firm's title. His shares were frozen, pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. Rebecca was appointed interim managing partner, a role she had never actively sought. Yet, the partners recognized she was the only one who could stabilize the firm during this crisis. With deliberate speed, she instituted a rigorous internal audit, scrubbing every department for signs of malpractice. New transparency protocols were set, and associates underwent ethical compliance training. Clients, initially alarmed by the scandal, were reassured by Rebecca's unwavering commitment to restoring trust. Over time, the firm's reputation began to recover, bolstered by her leadership. Amanda's father, a tech mogul named James Wilson, discreetly reached out to Rebecca, apologizing for his daughter's involvement. He hinted at possible business collaborations, partly to mend fences, partly because he admired Rebecca's handling of the fallout. Although the pain still ran deep, Rebecca knew forging fresh alliances would safeguard the firm's future. She kept personal grudges separate from professional growth, another lesson born from surviving the turmoil Michael had wrought. Day by day, she watched the pieces of her life rearrange themselves into a new mosaic of possibility. As months passed, the trial against Michael gained momentum. Each new piece of evidence hammered home the extent of his wrongdoing. Former colleagues and betrayed clients testified, outlining a pattern of deceit spanning multiple years. In courtroom after courtroom, the facade of Michael Harrison as a brilliant, respectable lawyer crumbled. The press devoured every salacious detail, from the affair that sparked the investigation to the shell companies that funneled illicit funds. Rebecca, called as a key witness, delivered her testimony with clarity. She confirmed discovering incriminating files in their shared home office and recounted the day Amanda revealed her pregnancy. The defense tried to paint her as vindictive, implying she had orchestrated a personal vendetta. But Rebecca's meticulous documentation of Michael's fraud and her measured demeanor under cross-examination left the defense with few footholds. During a brief recess, Michael approached her in the hallway, eyes haunted. He murmured an apology that sounded more like a desperate plea for some trace of forgiveness. For a fleeting moment, Rebecca recalled the man she once loved. But the illusions had shattered. She simply turned away. The wheels of justice continued to turn, and in the end, the outcome would not hinge on her personal compassion. A week later, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on multiple counts: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, signaling the end of Michael Harrison's storied career and the beginning of his sentence behind bars. The aftermath rippled through Boston's legal community, becoming a cautionary tale about ambition unchecked by ethics. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed for comments, but Rebecca offered only a brief statement, reiterating that no one, not even a high-powered attorney, was above the law. With her legal obligations fulfilled, Rebecca finally had space to breathe. She sold the Beacon Hill home that once stood as a monument to her illusory marriage, choosing instead a smaller, more serene residence overlooking the Charles River. She kept only a few personal items, a reminder of what she'd overcome. In her new role as managing partner of the rebranded Walker & Brooks, she directed the firm toward cases that aligned with higher ethical standards, ensuring that integrity formed the backbone of every transaction. Amanda faded from the public eye, having lost the baby midway through her pregnancy. Rumor suggested she relocated to the West Coast for a fresh start. If so, Rebecca felt a quiet relief, hoping they could both leave behind what had become a tangled web of heartbreak and deceit. 1 year after the trial, Rebecca sat in her corner office, a plaque on her desk reading Walker & Brooks, built on integrity. Through the window, the Boston skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Clients now sought the firm specifically because of its transparent, principle-driven ethos, a sharp turn from its earlier associations with Michael's downfall. Colleagues respected Rebecca not only for her legal acumen, but for her steadfast moral compass. Sometimes, she still reflected on that autumn morning when Amanda Wilson appeared uninvited, turning her life upside down with a single devastating announcement. The journey since had been one of heartbreak, legal battles, and soul-searching. She had lost a husband but found a deeper sense of self. She had witnessed corruption, yet rediscovered her faith in justice. In the end, everything that once threatened to break her had instead forged her into someone far more resilient. Standing, she glanced at a photograph of Eleanor Harrison, recalling how the formidable matriarch had woven that infidelity clause into the trust. Perhaps Eleanor had anticipated this day, understanding that only a crisis of betrayal could bring forth the strength to preserve the family's true values. With renewed resolve, Rebecca stepped out of her office, ready for whatever awaited her next. So what do you think? Would you invoke a hidden family clause if you discovered your spouse was unfaithful? Did Rebecca's path to reclaim her own power surprise you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more captivating tales of strength and redemption. Her husband had an affair with his 23-year-old secretary. "I'm having your husband's child," she said.